before anybody went over there, before reading and writing, before anybody could be influenced or split the entire kingdom, the empire, into what it is today, to be able to sit and hear what happened before. All the stories. I mean, there's so many stories, and I've been watching stories and reading stories and looking online about people telling stories that don't come close to this documentation, because it turns out different. Once people start telling their own stories, whether it's Samoa or Hawaii or New Zealand, it gets rowdy. Where Mariner, before all the split happened, we can just hear from him while the entire empire was in one piece. Before France, before Britain, before Germany, before America, there was one empire, and I believe that the capital of that empire happened to be in Tonga. That's just my own opinion based on what I've been reading and the behavior of the Tongans, the wars, and just through his travel. There may have been people who have lived in Tonga before, had experiences in Tonga before, but none of them were this detailed. Not that I've read anywhere where there's Baker or whoever it is that went and stayed in Mu'a. They were there, but they just didn't live or see the gangsta of Tonga before England got over there, because it seems like the history, Tonga didn't want to share this. I can't believe that Tonga doesn't teach the Mariner story in school. Because I was asking people from Vava'u, hey, you been to Whenetoa? Is there a big giant platform or a big stone that you have to move at a cemetery? And they're like, no, there's nothing like that in Whenetoa. And I was like, dude, there's 200 bodies underneath a slab of stone that Mariner said that they had to rig up pulleys to pull this thing up. And he looked under there and he saw hella bodies in there of the warriors, and they were all wrapped in either ngatu or fala, and they were all just laid next to each other. And he looked in there and said that there was 2 new ones from the past couple months. And I asked people in Vava'u if they've ever seen a platform like that. And they said, no, there's nothing like that, or they didn't notice it, or there's something growing over it, but the cemeteries are no longer there, or they're not there. And I'm telling them, oh, well, I wonder if anybody could go and look for something like that near Whenetoa, just to prove what Mariner was saying was right. Because just like how he was talking about Port-au-Prince and where it was located, and they said they sent divers down in there, and how Finau said if he had any idea that there was gold or the importance of gold and gold coins and stuff, he would have moved it off of the ship so that he can use it as bargaining and trading tools to all those who came through Tonga. But Finau didn't know what that was, and so he left it on the ship when he burned it, because they were small pieces of coin. It wasn't big enough to make tools, and it wasn't big enough to make weapons. These giant containers of gold and silver and copper, he had no idea what to do with, so he left it on the ship, and they burned the Port-au-Prince down into the water. The stories came up, and then they had sent divers down there in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, or wherever the stories go, and somebody found it, or some people think that the kingdom has it, so we don't know. But it's stuff like that where I think there's buried monuments as far as that cemetery, that the description Mariner gives of that burial site, and nobody can tell me from Vava'u, nobody can tell me that they know where that thing is. I think it's an injustice to the history for Tonga to bury that part of the history just to look and sound more like good people, like nice people, which, friendly islands and whatnot. But I think a lot of the savage behaviors were buried by the Tongan government for the purposes of looking the best dressed, best foot forward type thing. And I think now is a good time to be like, all right, the whole world knows that we were savages, and so on and so forth. There is no written documentation of anybody going to war except for the Tongans. There are stories. The Samoans, they were warriors, and the Hawaiians, and they have their own weapons, and the Fijians, and but there are no written experiences like the Maoris are going to war with whoever. There's no written person that was there that watched them fight and watched them kill. There is nothing like that I've seen or heard. All I hear is, oh, they used to be warriors. And that's general throughout the entire Pacific. Our privilege to listen to Mariner is saying, yeah, I watched these people and they killed each other. There's a book with the Fijian chief where he was talking about Tonga back in the day, and he was talking about the savagery of Tonga. And he said that these guys aren't regular men. His description of the Tongan, this is a Fijian chief. He said, these guys aren't regular men. These guys have to be gods, because it's almost as if they look forward to dying in battle. They don't have an inkling of fear because of their love for either savagery or love for war or love for battle. But their love for each other is guaranteed. One of the reasons why this chief thought that they didn't have any fear was because, yeah, I am going to put my life on the line for this guy next to me, or I'm gonna die for my family, or whoever it is, or whatever it is. He said that their greatest enemy is each other, which, according to Mariner, that's what it pretty much sounded like. Everybody had a kava ceremony in all the islands, and it seemed like all the kava ceremonies were tailor-made to the travelings of Finau, or the king, or the warriors. Every island has a tradition as far as kava ceremonial. Anybody who knows about kava today knows that kava has always been even just social, and Mariner proves it. He says, I was keeping track of how much these guys mix, and they just mix too much. I'm not going to keep track of it anymore because they mix all the time. And the ones that they mix with, or they like mixing with as far as islands, is their good friends, the Fijians. They really look up to these Fijians, or at least they trust these Fijians, and they love how savage the Fijians are also. So that's their homeboys. So although they're related to all the different other islands as far as family is concerned, it seems like they're friends because they don't know where they came from. Mariner asked an old guy, he looked like he was in his 80s, Mariner said, and he said, I asked him where the Fijians came from. He said, we don't know, we were just here, and the ship came along and they landed there and they started living there. And that's that old guy's story from his grandfather. And if we're talking about 1805, this old man was probably born in the 1720s or 30s, and he heard it from his grandfather, who had to have been born in the 1600s. So this is all just connecting the dots as far as the stories that come from Mariner and his experience.